Hey, everybody. It is my absolute delight to welcome onto the podcast today Thomas Renner. Thomas and I had never met. Well, we did through a text message, which was like a weird confluence of events about 3 years ago in a coaching environment we were in. And then I actually got a chance to spend Thomas in person in March of 2024. We went to a men's retreat together. And if you've been listening to the show, I've talked a little bit about my experience there with Elena Armijo and some of the other folks I've had on recently. Thomas and I shared a bunk room. We shared some.
Sure did.
We shared a bunk room. We shared some emotions. We shared some good food. And I knew when I met Thomas, like this is one of the people I really want to get connected with, and also have you share with my audience and with our audience what you're up to. Thomas, welcome. Good morning to you. Where are you coming into us from today?
Good morning, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to always be in your presence. So I'm coming here from Dallas, Texas.
See, this is why I have Thomas on. He's just an immediate flatterer. He's so sweet. I love it. So Thomas,
well, I have ulterior motives at all times, Jason.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, me too. Yeah. We're just gonna improv with each other in our lowest self the whole time, which is ironic because Thomas does a number of things. He just wrapped up a really significant part of his life, and we'll talk just a little bit about that. And what Thomas does now is he is a life and leadership coach. He went through the same coach training program that I went through. We weren't in the cohort together, but same company. He's also a yogi, and he is a community builder. One of the reasons I think Thomas, you and I immediately have, we both love people. And not everybody loves people. There are a lot of people who don't like people. I happen to be a person who really loves people. And when I met you, I'm like, I think Thomas loves people too. So you're a community builder. So before we kick off here and get further into what you're up to now, what would you like us to know about you to kick this off?
Oh gosh, it's always an interesting question because it makes me think of like, what's my elevator pitch to like sell myself? And that's absolutely like not the lane that I would want to go in.
Neither do I want you to do that either.
I'm not selling myself at all. I actually just did a small like journal entry on like, what are 3 fun things that I want to share as I meet new people that would sort of describe me without describing me. My favorite place to grow up going to was SeaWorld. I used to cry at the last Shamu show every night. It was the nighttime show.
Yeah.
I collected Beanie Babies for years. It's the worst investment I've ever made.
I was going to say, and now you're sitting on, and now you're like, and now you're recording this from your yacht. I mean, obviously that turned out well.
From my walk-up apartment. I had over 250 of them, and over the years, like we've dispersed them with family and sold some of them, and my dad has most of them now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm reluctant to agree with you for some reason this morning about loving people, but I do love people. I love what people can do and what people can be, and I love helping them do what they want to do. Like that's something that's important for people to know. Yeah.
So let's briefly cover off on, and you were just telling me this, what you literally just retired from yesterday. It just happens to be a coincidence. I don't know that we timed this on purpose. And then I'm going to take a little bit step back on maybe how you mentioned your childhood. So Thomas, just let everybody know, what have you been doing? What is one of the things you've been doing for the last 13 years that is no longer in your income stream?
Yeah. To give a little like circling back, I have been told for a long time what I should do and what I would be good at. And the joy in that was I was pretty darn good at a lot of things. But I sort of coined this phrase for myself that it's very common. It's just like that I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none.
Yeah.
And I used to really wear it like a badge of dishonor. I was like, I feel like I'm just mediocre at can I cuss? Sorry.
Of course you can cuss.
I was like mediocre at a fuck ton of things and not great at one thing. And what has sort of grown from that was like my entire career as an actor, my career is in fitness, my career as a coach, but none of them I really had chosen until now, which is being a coach. So I forget what your question was.
Just what's the thing? Just share with us because I mentioned it. What's the thing you literally just retired from yesterday?
Yeah, so like all that to be said, like cycling is something that was a big part of my life in the fitness arena for a very, very long time, 13 years and counting, it feels like. And I taught my last cycling class last night. I say that I'm going into cycling retirement. You never know. You can always come out of retirement and you can make new decisions.
Of course.
But I really came to terms with it was an era, it was a time in my life that I really chose into the joy that it brought, the success that it gave me. And then I realized that it wasn't bringing me joy anymore. And that people that were in my classes deserved to have someone that wanted to constantly be there. And I wanted to be there with them, just doing other things. I was like, let's go have a margarita instead.
Yeah.
I just wanted to do other things. So yeah, I retired from cycling last night. And, you know, it comes with a lot of joy, a lot of grief, and a lot of excitement for what's next. And then what's next is kind of what I'm already doing, just doing more of it.
Yeah. What did you write out into the sunset on? What was the song that you wrapped up your last class with?
Fashion of His Love by Lady Gaga.
Nice. There was. That was
so
cool.
Do you even know that song?
I do. Yeah, my wife used to be a Lady Gaga fan. Now she's just a straight Swiftie, but Lady Gaga was her person for a long time.
So I actually played the first playlist I ever created 13 years ago for my last class.
Wow. That's so cool. And so that would have been on her
really
first
was.
album.
It really was.
Yeah, amazing. So
Fashion of Hers Love, I think, was on the second one.
Okay, yeah.
But I'm terrible at that, so I could be wrong.
And I could be wrong, too. So let's talk a little bit about your background, like how you were raised, a little bit of what's led you into acting, to fitness, to yogi, and then let's talk about your journey into coaching and what you're up to now.
Yeah. What's the one thing that you want to know about my childhood? I'm curious if there's something that's burning on your mind.
Yeah, well, and I know that we've talked about, we have a mutual trust here. You had mentioned something at the retreat, and we respect the confidentiality there, and I checked with you about something about your childhood that created a huge impact for you and created a lot of what you had said, your identity, especially as a young adult. So I think I think the question I just want to straight up ask is, and you had shared with me and with us, and I'll share it here because I've got your permission, is you said that you knew very early on that you were gay at a young age, and that's not always the experience for folks. And then you had mentioned something about how that drastically impacted a lot of how you showed up in the world for a long time, from, like you said, expectations, what you should be doing, etc. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how that went for you.
Yeah, I knew I was gay early on, but I didn't know how to name it. So what you might not know is I did grow up very religious. I grew up in a Methodist church which the Methodist Church has had a few shifts and changes over the years. But when I was there, they were relatively gay accepting that I knew of, but we never used the word gay. Like, gay was never a term that was used to identify. It was always used as a derogatory term. And even then, I didn't know what it meant. I just knew that I liked men. So cut to me, sitting on the living room carpet at 1 a.m. when my parents are asleep, watching Showtime, but it's static and in snow screen because we didn't own the channel, watching Queer as Folk. And realizing, oh, this is me. Like, this is, I like this. I like men. But what does that mean? So I didn't know. So kind of fast forward, like, I knew I was different. I was into theater. Everyone kind of knew I was different. No one really talked about it in high school. I wasn't the cool kid. I was incredibly overweight. So I just found my community in theater, and like in theater, it's an incredibly accepting community. So I didn't ever feel like I was ostracized and never tried to be anything that I wasn't. Then I went to college, and I look back on this as like slight identity trauma, which it wasn't in the moment, but like I look back and reflect and be like, I could have processed that differently. But I finally found out and knew that I was gay. I had named it. I had had an experience that was like, this is real. So I ran home to the apartment complex I was living in. I ran into a bunch of my friends that were in the apartment, and I just really ran in and said, I'm gay. And they were like, we know. And then I ran out.
Their response was actually just, we know. That was good. It was just like, we know.
Literally, they were watching a movie and they didn't even like think twice. They're like, we know. And then I just walked out and I was like, what the fuck? Like, I just had this big like moment, and they were like, we know. And when I say trauma, it was like, I felt like I wasn't validated, even though I was validating myself and like understanding who I was.
Sure. All
that to be said, kind of what boiled up for me in the retreat, which is where I think your listeners will sort of come back full circle as you've talked about it before. I have really leaned into being gay as the only part of my identity, which then created rifts in like my relationship with straight men, for instance. Like
Sure.
I find slash find or found slash find it hard to sometimes connect with straight men because I had sort of identified with the sexuality or the sexual part of being gay. Not what does
Interesting.
it mean to be queer? Those are two
Yeah.
interestingly different questions for me. It's like, what does it mean to be gay? What does
Yeah.
it mean to be queer? And how do those identities come into play? And so when I
Yeah.
went on the retreat, it was really nice to be in community with men who identified as straight and some queer men as well,
Mm-hmm.
and be intimate with them in a non-sexual platonic way. I didn't know how to do that because my first instinct is always, and I learned this to even circle back to one of my longest term relationships. I learned that for some reason, when I meet someone, the first question I often would ask myself is, do I want to sleep with them? That was just an instinctual question based on the
Sure.
previous relationship that I had had. And so to be in a room of men, that wasn't my first instinct. Don't get me wrong. Like I had those thoughts, but
Sure.
they weren't the first presenting ones. And by the end of the retreat, I had one of the leaders reflected me as like, you are not just a gay man.
Yeah.
And that sort of hit me because I knew that, but I wasn't acting like it.
Tom, you said something. First of all, thank you for sharing all that and being vulnerable about that. You said something that really struck me. We all have a version of your immediate, what I call that a filter of like, would I sleep with them? We all have a version of that. And we heard from some other folks who were there. Some folks said, am I safe with this person? Like it's an immediate like instinction thing. For me, I think it's, can I easily connect and have fun with this person is like the immediate filter I go to with other men, especially. I think for women, I probably, at least in the past, had similar to what came up for you. And I just, that really was profound and hit me on like, so my encouragement for the audience listening is like, what's your immediate thing that you filter for? And what you just said, Thomas, is without, we don't need to share exactly how old you are, but it's not like you're 22 and you have never really learned how to do this. And finally, you're starting to work on this. So I do want to ask you a question as a straight man who doesn't have the experience you have is, what should straight men who care and want to create those places that have somebody who identifies as queer feel comfortable, like what would you need? Or what was it that made a difference for you? And I think, and we heard this from a couple other folks too, that were there that identified as queers. What is it that makes the difference? Because I would imagine it's really hard.
I think it's interesting. You're going to laugh at my answer because it's the antithesis of what I just shared. I think it's that they don't filter with gay men, all of them want to sleep with me. Because we're not coming on to all straight men. Like we're not like that's not the case. Right.
Yeah. Right.
That was the case for me. Right. But I'm not the deciding factor for the queer community. Right. So I know that might sound like, wait a second, this is not making any sense. This is not connecting. But I never felt like threatened by any of the men that were there that they would assume that all gay men want to sleep with me, because that leads sometimes, I won't say for all, that leads to sometimes the already barrier to connection.
Totally. Yeah. Well, it's
almost like all that we're built to do is have sex with each other or want to do that, then there are so many other versions of connection that we really can focus on. And that's why your filter is so great. Do I want to have fun and connect with this person? Like, what a great connection filter.
Yeah, sometimes. But I will say the downside for me in this, Thomas, is that if my intuition is wrong or I'm having a bad day or like my guard is up more for whatever reason, I'm sure I miss out on opportunities for amazing relationships with other men. Then I'm talking about other men specifically. And I might miss because for you, same thing, like, oh, like, do I want to sleep with them? Oh, I don't. So then move on. And I don't know if that's how it showed up, move on, but I'm just really thinking about the reflection of, for myself, on how that filter is also limiting, because I don't actually know. It's just an intuition or an instinctual thing, but that isn't always correct.
Yeah, but we're also human, right? So we're going to make those like cognitive errors. But what I wanted to really share as the learning from the weekend in relation to this conversation is gay and straight men aren't that different.
No.
I held them as wildly different, which caused me to put up barriers to build relationships with straight men. Now, there's a few different relationships in my past that have led me to feel this way, and I've reflected back and I've done the work, and I'm looking even still on what it is. But that's why it was so powerful for me to be like, hey, we're not that different. Okay, how would I connect with them? Because I don't connect on the stereotypical things often. Like, I can spout out different facts around sports that make me sound really smart. But at the end of the day, I would literally rather do anything else in the world than watch a football game. I find that to be nails on a chalkboard. It is incredibly boring. That's my opinion. Doesn't mean it has to be for everybody. And again, that's also stereotypical straight. Like if I was to stereotype the straight man.
Totally.
I don't want to go to Hooters. Those are sort of, I mean, I say this in jest, but also factual, right? Like I don't want, like, that there's a restaurant named Twin Peaks. I'm like, Lord have mercy. Now, we have our own things like that in the gay community too. So I'm not dogging, I'm not yucking anybody's yum here. I'm just sharing with, like, I have held gay men and straight men so differently that caused me to not connect with them. And what that retreat really helped me do, from even looking at my careers until this point and relationships, it's allowed me to really shift and say, okay, I can have the thought of, do I want to sleep with them? And do I want to have fun and connect? And what's my value to them? And what's their value to me? And what's another question I can ask? Like there's an and to it all, not a one question answers everything.
I love it. You're talking to an improver over here, and I think you are as well. An actor, you've probably done some improv training. So yeah, like what's next? I as we're talking, I just had this image of you, Thomas, on your own sitcom. And I had an image of you on it, like your own television show. And literally the setup is that you get asked out on this date by your perfect guy. He's like, and I want to take you to Hooters and we're going to watch the football game at 1:00. It's like the worst fucking nightmare first date you could ever go on.
I would literally say,
like,
no thanks.
You're like, my filter for I want to be with you was high. It's at 0 now. It's just, you're dead to me. Like we can be friends.
Like, is this the price of admission to sleep with you tonight? Because then maybe, but if this is the price of admission for like the rest of my life, we're out.
I see this for you. This is good.
The Talking to Cool People podcast is brought to you by Jason Frizzell Coaching. Jason works with amazing people who are looking to find and develop their passion and purpose and create their journey to wherever it is they want to go. Check us out at jasonfrizzell.com, Facebook, or on Instagram. Jason loves hearing from anyone who thinks it would be cool to connect, to be coached, or to be a guest on our show. Email him at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com or DM him on Facebook and Instagram. And now, back to some more amazing conversation on Talking to Cool People.
So now, based on everything you shared so far, you mentioned something that I really would like to hone in on, and it was career choices based on what you just said. So if you'd be mind sharing, like, how has what you've outlined for us so far influenced what you've done and what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about my elevator pitch, when I talk to people about coaching specifically, like I, again, had just sort of done everything that everyone told me that, hey, you'd be really good at this, you should do it. And I did it. For 32 years, I did that. And it was great. I had a wonderful life. It was successful. I'm using air quotes, everybody, because like you are the only person that gets to define what that is. But at 32, I lost my job suddenly. The company that I'd been working for had gone under for a variety of reasons. And
what were you doing? What were you doing at the time? What kind of role was that?
I was a full-time cycling instructor. I was teaching for a company. I was traveling across the U.S. I was hiring new instructors, scouting new instructors, training new instructors, and I was the lead instructor for our region here in Dallas.
Oh.
And I really loved it. Like we truly built a community. I loved the people that I worked with. I loved the people that were mentoring me. And so when that happened, it was pretty traumatic. Even back looking now, I'm like, that moment in time I didn't even fully recognize the traumatic experience that it was.
Yeah.
But what happened was the summer before it all went down. So this is 2019. This is pre-pandemic. Summer 2019, one of my riders actually gave me a book. Her name is Brooke Castillo. She's a master coach. She has a coaching school called the Life Coach School. She's got a podcast too. So we're on a
Know her.
podcast. It's
Yep.
a great podcast.
Yep. Yeah. I know who she is.
You know her?
Yeah.
Oh,
I know
yeah.
Life Coach School. I don't know her. I know the Life Coach School.
Yeah. And the book was Self-Coaching 101. And when I tell you, Jason, that I am not a reader, I'm not a reader. Like, I don't really enjoy reading that much. And
Yeah.
I read that book sitting by the pool in my Speedo, summer 2019, like it was my job. And I'm so glad that I did, because I'd already started thinking about, hey, what's the next level of my coaching? What's the next level of my life? And then when Flywheel closed, I was like, I need to make a bigger change. So Flywheel closed, cut to me working for Equinox at the time, and then the pandemic hits. You're like, well, WTF?
Yeah.
Like, now what do I really do? I had a couple friends that had gone through the accomplishment coaching, the coaching program that I went through, and they were like, you should do it. I'm just fast forwarding a lot. And July of 2020, pandemic, I decided to invest in the next stage of my life. I decided. Nobody said you should be a coach. No one said you'd be really good at this. I decided, you know what? I have been helping people for X amount of years in this way. Now I want to get paid for it in this way. It's not going to be fitness. It's not going to be on a bike. And I got to make that decision because I then knew who I was. I knew I was built to help people succeed, create their own life. I have a deep-seated empathy and compassion for the human existence, for people when I'm with them. And I've been given a superpower to do that. So why not do it?
Amazing. When you
that's
decided,
where I'm at today.
Amazing, Thomas. So what was the experience? Were you present at the time when you chose this for yourself, that you were actually getting to choose something for yourself?
I don't know if I was fully present to it. I did realize that nobody helped me make the decision, which I think was the big defining factor. Is nobody called me and said, we want you to be a coach here, right? No one said, what's your new career? When are you going to start being a coach? I just said to myself, I'm not an entrepreneur at my core. I'm not an entrepreneur, like, at all. I am the most organized, disorganized human being you'll ever meet. So it really was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And even looking back, it's been 5 years now.
Yeah,
essentially 5 years, 4 years, I suppose. Is my business where I thought it would be? No, but I'm building it on my own time, on my own journey, and I'm choosing it. No one said you got to speed this up. You're going too slow. You got to do this faster. I am choosing it because of, this is the lifestyle that I want. This is what's important to me. These are the kinds of experiences I want. And if I did it any differently, that wouldn't be available to me.
Yeah.
So I took the learning of that really powerfully, and I take that into my business and my life now. It's like, okay, I ask myself questions like, okay, what am I doing this for? Who am I doing this for? Do I want to do this? And the most powerful answer that I often give myself is, I don't know. And the more that you say, I don't know to yourself, you will get an answer.
Absolutely.
But you have to be willing to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's more comfortable it was more comfortable for me, even though I didn't know, to keep doing what everyone said I'd be good at.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. Did you find, were you somebody historically who people would tell you you'd be good at things? Were you also somebody who liked to check with a lot of people on, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Can I get your opinion, get your advice? A lot of external, I don't call it validation. I think there's a lot of value in trusted mentors and people around you, but you wanted to get a lot of feedback on whether your decision was the right decision based on other people's opinions.
Absolutely. The only other decision, which is probably why I was always shying away from it, that I was like, I'm going to make this decision and I'm not going to ask anybody, was taking out loans with Sally Mae. And look where that got me, Jason. Fucked.
fucked.
And so that was just a good answer to be like, oh, I can't trust myself. Like I need to ask for help. And they need to tell me what I'm going to do. And now I'm like, okay, take ownership or responsibility for, yeah, that was a really terrible decision. You can't go back and change it. But now I know that asking for help and asking for support is something that you choose into, not as the deciding factor, but as part of it. It's part of the journey. It's part of your decision making. It's not the decision that you make.
Yeah. You said this is a great segue into a conversation I'm about to have with my friend Sheila next week on the podcast. It's second time guest. And she speaks and talks a lot about expectations and how there's 4 types of expectations. I just heard her talk about this a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to share a preview of this and offer it to you. I think this will be a good conversation starter for us. She said there's 4 types of expectations. There's expectations we put on ourselves. There's expectations we put on others. There's expectations others put on us. And the 4th one is expectations we believe that are on us that nobody ever put on us, that we have somehow created. And and she's a coach and she's an attorney and a social worker and has a really cool framework for looking
That's
at
a dangerous
expectations.
combination.
It is. She's kind of a master of all of them too, which is pretty frightening in a good way.
Yeah.
She does a lot of good. But the idea there is, and I heard her speak a couple weeks ago. The idea is how easy it is, and I'll just speak for myself, to confuse where those land for me. Of like, oh, the expectation that nobody ever said that I needed to do or that I cared, that I somehow thought is like, and you hear this all the time with clients, like my duty or the thing I need to do, or the expectation I put on myself is I need to be this far in my business in 5 years. Nobody told you that, and that's just an internal thing, and normalizing all of it. And her whole thing is for that last bucket of things, that is the expectations that nobody ever said to you that you put on yourself. You want to get rid of most of those because those ones weigh you down. She used a great example. It was a great analogy. It's like, hey, when your relative comes into town, you go, hey, I'm going to come pick you up at the airport. Did they ever ask for you to pick them up at the airport? Did they expect you to pick them up at the airport? Maybe you want to, and it's an offer, but how many things have you done in your life? And I know for me, where I believed it was the thing I had to do because it was an expectation of how we're raised, what we see the world telling us about how a straight man should be, or a gay man should be, or just how a man should be. All these things are the ways we should be, that ends up like doing a bunch of shit, from my experience, it sounds like for you, is that I don't want to fucking do. Yeah. And it sounds like you've had a similar experience.
There's an easy answer that's hard to do. And This is what I coach people on, is be your own best friend.
So easy. No problem.
When you get to know yourself, even in the uncertainty of it all, you can ask yourself those questions. Do I want to go pick them up at the airport?
Yeah.
And often, Jason, the answer will still be yes.
Totally.
And it's coming from a place of, I want to do that, not do they expect me to do it? Or I expect myself to do it. Or the world has expected me to take care of my family in such a way to go and do it. When you get to know yourself and what's important to you and why it's important, you get to say, okay, the most important question I have found in my life is to answer what for. In any situation, what for?
Yeah.
I'm going to dinner on Friday night. What for? Oh, I want to commune with my friends. Cool. That's awesome.
Amazing.
I'm going to, go to bed at 9 p.m. What for? Because sleep is important to me. Right?
Yeah.
But we don't often ask ourselves the questions of who are we and really identify who we want to be, who we want to continue to be, or who we want to even let go of who we once were.
Oof.
To then we need to go there first before we talk about expectations.
Totally.
Because how can you see the expectations if you don't know who you are?
No, absolutely.
And to circle back to my past, I didn't know who I was for 32 years because everybody told me who I was supposed to be.
Who were you told you were supposed to be?
Now I'm choosing into who I want to be.
Yeah.
It's like you're a fitness instructor.
Who are you told?
You're fat. You're an actor. You're gay. I had people telling me that I was gay before I was gay, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So everyone was telling me I was all of these things. And I was like, cool, this is great.
Easy.
But yeah, I didn't realize I could choose those things.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few times. Oh, sorry, Thomas,
Yeah,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, that's it. That's go.
You had mentioned here your journey of self-discovery. Why don't we get wrap up for today? And like, what have you learned about yourself that has sparked this change in you? Like, what are the specific things? It can be elevated, spiritual. It doesn't really matter. I'm just curious. What have you learned about yourself?
That's such a loaded question. I've never been asked in that way, so please forgive if there's like some silence in how I want to share what this is. I've learned that going slow is the key to living a fulfilled life. I've learned that you don't have to live alone. I've learned that the answer to all your problems sometimes lies in your complaints.
And good one.
I've learned that when I'm my own best friend, life isn't as hard as we make it out to be.
I'm going to assert that those are some hard-fought lessons.
They're hard to learn, but they're easy to accept.
Yeah. What I mean by that is, if we were going to talk about the way you got there, those are through trials and tribulations and really having to work through those things. Those like it's kind of like be your best friend. Easy to say, harder to do. Everything I heard you say, and I guess I'm just speaking from my own experience. I have a similar journey in terms of where I've landed on and who I am. Similar, those lessons for me were very hard fought. I actually fought them myself without knowing about it, because it's a lot. In some ways, it's harder when you're in the process to actually. Well, how much for me? I'll share my experience. For me, it's a lot harder for me to trust my own decision making than to just ask everybody else. Because then I get to be and have to be responsible for my decisions, as opposed to I asked these 20 other people who I think know more than I do, and they told me that this is the thing to do, and it didn't work out for me. That's their fault, not my fault. Like I get to.
It's easier to blame other people than yourself.
Yeah. I get to shuck responsibility. I think we'll wrap here today. And you mentioned you are a yogi. You do a lot of like spiritual work and just very connected to all that part of you. Curious, being your own best friend, what kind of practices would you suggest for folks to try, or something that works for you when you find yourself not in that mode? So I'm sure you do, because like I said, you're human.
There's one practice that has a lot of opportunities. And so I'm going to say one thing, but there's a lot underneath it, is journaling. There's so many ways to journal. I think that we all think we have to sit down for an hour a day and write something down. And there's so many ways that you can journal. Like, journaling doesn't exist as just a writing tool. You can go for a walk by yourself with no technology, right? You could write one sentence every morning, right? It doesn't have to be a long paragraph. There's this book called The Artist's Way, and I still haven't freaking finished it because I get so stuck on what they talk about the writing pages. I'm like, I can't do this. But having some self-expression tool, whether it's maybe painting and my encouragement is, you don't have to do it by yourself necessarily. You can do it in a communal way with other people. But having a moment where you truly get to say, let me just write some things down and let my thoughts run. We're so afraid of our own thoughts, Jason. We're so afraid of them.
Yeah.
And guess what? They're just thoughts.
They're just thoughts.
But we're so afraid of them that we're going to discover something that we don't want to see. And I'm like, when we discover things that we don't want to see, we can then do something about them. But if we're unwilling to discover them, they're just going to continue being our operating system. Sebastian Little is one of the most brilliant people that I know on the planet. And he talks about, like, you have your own iOS system and like updating it. Like, you can't update your own iOS system if you don't let some things go.
Totally. Yeah.
And that's where journaling is the practice, because every time I've never left a journal entry feeling worse.
Yeah.
I've always left feeling, or better, full of joy, compassion. I'm not saying it's not depressing, because I do write about some things and I'm like, I've been holding on to that for a while. But I've never left with like, I wish I hadn't had done that.
Yeah. It's, to me, this is like working out, taking away the, I actually hurt myself working out. But most people, I'm sure there's times you're like, oh, I could really do without journaling today. I'm just not feeling it. But when you're done, it's always just reminding yourself, because, we would call that your survival mechanism of like avoidance or procrastination, whatever you want to call that, where your brain's like, well, we know this is going to be good for you, but it's also a little bit scarier than not doing it. So from fear, we're not going to do the thing. I think we all have our version of journaling. It's funny you bring up journaling. I don't journal, and I know I should. So maybe I can ask you to stand for me to create a practice. I'm going to start with like a 5-minute journal where I transcribe, or maybe use the app on my phone, because I just hate writing, period, which is why I'm a
There's an
podcaster
app
and a coach.
called Otter. Have you heard of Otter?
I have Otter. Yeah, I have Otter.
Yeah, just open it up, go for a walk, start talking. I mean, you talk a lot.
Yeah, totally. We'll put it. Well, thank you, Thomas. We'll put your Otter affiliate link in the show notes. Let's drive some additional revenue for Tom. This episode sponsored by Otter AI transcription service.
Love
yeah,
it.
I have Otter. Thomas, last question I have for you. I have 2 more questions for you. First one is, how can people connect with you? And we'll put all this in the show notes as well.
Yeah. First thing, of course, you can visit my website. It's Rennergy Coaching. So my energy is what people are often drawn to. So my last name is Renner. So I just combine it, rennergycoaching.com.
Makes
you can
sense.
also find me at Rennergy Coaching on Instagram. And I did have a podcast as well. I put a pause on it, and we're just taking a hiatus. So if you do want to find me on Spotify or Apple Music for my podcast, it's called The Joy in Living. You can find that there. So those are the 3 places you can find me.
Cool. We'll put all those in the show notes. Last question I have for you is, if you got to have, 18-year-old Thomas here on the podcast with us, what would you want him to know?
Go big and go slow.
Go big and go slow. Go big and go slow. Are you an impatient person by like a default setting? Are you pretty fast mover?
Oh, absolutely. I tend my thoughts run faster than my mouth, which causes people to be like, wait, what did you say? Or I will say like one sentence and my partner's like, how the hell did you get there? Like, where did that come from? And I'm like, well, what you didn't hear me think was this, and this, and this is what actually came out of my mouth. And he's like, okay, I get that, but good God, like, let me in on some of the more stuff beforehand so it doesn't sound so random.
Yeah. Man, I'm just picturing you. Quick mind, tons of energy. Could you design a better spin instructor?
No, that's why I was so successful.
So good, right? You're like, because if you enjoy it, or you could probably also dig in and get the energy even if you didn't feel it, right? Like you could just like show up and do it.
1,000%.
That's how I am too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this is where my choosing comes into. I'm choosing into public speaking. I'm choosing into being on stages and talking and really being with people and supporting people and helping people in just a different way. I was doing it in cycling, and now I'm doing it in coaching. I let go of cycling. Now I can move in and have more energy to do the bigger things, talking in front of people, having live retreats, having live events. That gives me the same fuel in the way that I actually want to be presenting in the world.
Yeah. And probably a little more thoughtful than, you're doing a great job. You're in the leaderboard, and like, I love spinning. Spinning's great, but gives you a little chance to connect on a deeper level than, you're doing a great job. Keep up the RPMs.
100%.
Thomas, I'm so glad we got a chance to make this happen. So glad we got a chance to meet other than text messaging. Thank you so much for your time, for your grace, for your vulnerability today. We'll have you back on here sometime in the next year or so to see what you're up to and continue the conversation. As you can, everybody listening, you can probably tell Thomas has a tremendous amount of wisdom around the master of many things, I would say. So I'm going to give you my little spin shout out. Thank you very much, my friend. So good to have you on.
No, thank you, Jason. Thanks for all that you're doing for the world and for humanity and for who you're showing up as. Like, meeting you in person was one of the greatest joys I could have in this year.
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Talking to Cool People with Jason Frizzell. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and give us a shout out, or take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. If something from today's episode piqued your interest and you'd like to connect, email us at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com. We love hearing from our listeners because you're cool people too.